My family threw me out when I lost my job, but 5 years later when they needed my signature they came begging. The rain was relentless that night, hammering against the thin glass of my bedroom window like it wanted to break through and wash away everything inside. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the floor as if it held some kind of answer. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from exhaustion. The weight of what had just happened felt heavier than anything I'd ever carried before. It wasn't supposed to be this way. Families are meant to stand by you, aren't they? Or so I thought. I had always been the dependable one in our family, the glue that held us together when cracks started to form. Growing up, I was the sibling who made sure everyone got home safely after school, who helped Mom balance the budget when Dad's construction work slowed down during winter months. Even as an adult, I became the go-to person for advice, loans, or even just someone to listen. So when I lost my job, I expected compassion, maybe even a little patience while I figured things out. What I didn't expect was betrayal. It started with whispers behind closed doors. "She can't keep living here rent-free," my older brother muttered loud enough for me to hear. "We all have bills to pay." At first, I tried to ignore it. Losing your job is humiliating enough without having to justify yourself to people who should love you unconditionally. But then came the thinly veiled comments about how I needed to get my act together and stop being a burden. Each word cut deeper than the last until finally, one evening over dinner, the dam broke. "You've overstayed your welcome," my father said bluntly, his voice devoid of emotion. He didn't look at me as he spoke. Instead, he kept his eyes fixed on the newspaper spread across the table. The room fell silent except for the ticking clock on the wall, a sound that suddenly seemed unbearably loud. I opened my mouth to protest, to explain that I was actively looking for new opportunities, that I hadn't given up, but no words came out. Instead, tears welled up in my eyes, blurring my vision. That same night, they handed me a duffel bag stuffed with clothes and told me to leave. No second chances, no heartfelt goodbye. Just cold indifference wrapped in practicality. As I stepped out into the pouring rain, dragging my suitcase along the slick pavement, I couldn't help but wonder how quickly loyalty could evaporate under pressure. The days that followed were a blur of uncertainty. I crashed on friends' couches until their hospitality wore thin, worked odd jobs to scrape together enough money for food and rent. Every rejection letter felt like another blow, every missed call from potential employers like another door slamming shut. Yet somewhere amidst the chaos, something unexpected began to take root: resilience. Slowly but surely, I learned to rely on myself, not because I wanted to, but because I had no other choice. 5 years passed in the blink of an eye. 5 long, grueling years filled with late nights spent studying, early mornings chasing buses to interviews, and countless sacrifices I never imagined I'd have to make. And yet, despite all the hardships, I emerged stronger. Stronger than I ever thought possible. By the time I landed a stable position at a marketing firm, climbing the ranks steadily, I had built a life entirely on my own terms. A modest apartment, a small circle of loyal friends, and a sense of independence that nothing could shake. But life has a peculiar way of circling back to where it began. One crisp autumn afternoon, as golden leaves swirled around the sidewalk outside my office building, I received a phone call that sent shockwaves through my carefully constructed world. It was my mother, or rather, her trembling voice filtered through static-filled reception. She sounded different somehow, smaller, more fragile than the woman I remembered. "We need your help," she said after an awkward pause. Her words caught me off guard, leaving me momentarily speechless. "Help? From me? After everything?" Before I could respond, she continued, her tone laced with desperation. "It's complicated. Can we meet tomorrow? Please?" Against my better judgment, I agreed. Curiosity gnawed at me throughout the day, keeping me distracted during meetings and making sleep elusive that night. Who were these people now asking for my assistance? Strangers bearing familiar faces, perhaps? The next morning, I arrived at the cafe where we'd arranged to meet, bracing myself for whatever storm awaited. The sight of them sitting huddled together at a corner table hit me harder than I anticipated. My parents looked older, wearier. My siblings fidgeted nervously, avoiding eye contact. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for them. Almost. "What do you want?" I asked flatly once greetings were exchanged, a formal handshake here, a hesitant smile there. The air between us crackled with tension. My father cleared his throat, visibly uncomfortable. "There's A situation. With the house. The house. The very same house where I'd grown up, where memories both sweet and bitter lingered in every creaky floorboard. Where I'd once believed I belonged. It turns out, my mother interjected quickly, wringing her hands, that your name is still listed as co-owner on the deed. We're trying to sell, but we can't proceed without your signature. A sharp laugh escaped my lips before I could stop it. Of course. That's why they were here. Not because they missed me, not because they regretted their actions, but because they needed something from me. Business, pure and simple. And let me guess, I said coolly, leaning back in my chair. You assumed I'd just sign whatever papers you put in front of me without asking questions? Silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating. Finally, my brother spoke up, his voice tinged with frustration. Look, we know we messed up. Okay? We shouldn't have treated you the way we did. But we're desperate. If we don't sell soon. He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Desperation. It was written all over their faces, etched into the lines around their eyes and the slump of their shoulders. Part of me relished the irony, the poetic justice of seeing them grovel. But another part, buried deep beneath layers of hurt and anger, stirred uneasily. Over the next hour, they laid out their predicament in painstaking detail. Medical bills piling up, debt spiraling out of control, mounting pressure from creditors. Selling the family home was their only lifeline, their last hope of staying afloat. Without my cooperation, they were trapped. As much as I wanted to walk away, to let them stew in the consequences of their choices, something held me back. Maybe it was the faint echo of childhood summers spent playing in the backyard, or the memory of my mother humming softly while she cooked dinner. Whatever it was, it refused to let me turn my back completely. I'll think about it, I said finally, rising from my seat. Their expressions shifted instantly, relief mingling with apprehension. Don't expect an answer right away. Walking out of that cafe, I felt torn in two. On one hand, vindication sang its siren song, tempting me to exact revenge for years of neglect and abandonment. On the other, a stubborn thread of empathy tugged at my heartstrings, reminding me of who I used to be, the person who would have done anything to protect her family. Days turned into weeks as I wrestled with my decision. During that time, I found myself revisiting old photographs, flipping through pages of scrapbooks I hadn't touched in years. Memories flooded back unbidden, birthday parties, holiday dinners, lazy Sunday afternoons spent lounging in the living room. Despite everything, those moments had shaped me, defined parts of who I was today. Yet alongside the nostalgia lurked darker recollections, the sting of rejection, the ache of loneliness, the countless nights spent wondering what I'd done wrong. Could I forgive them for casting me aside so callously? More importantly, did I even want to? One evening, as twilight painted the sky in hues of orange and pink, I found myself standing outside the old neighborhood. The house loomed ahead, unchanged yet strangely foreign. Shadows danced across its windows, whispering secrets only walls could hold. Taking a deep breath, I approached the front door and knocked. When it swung open, revealing my mother's startled face, I realized something crucial. Forgiveness wasn't about forgetting or excusing past wrongs. It was about choosing to move forward, however imperfectly. And sometimes, moving forward meant taking a step back toward the people who had once pushed you away. Let's talk, I said softly, stepping inside. The air inside the house was thick with memories, each creak of the floorboards echoing like a ghost from my past. My mother hesitated for a moment before stepping aside to let me in, her expression a mixture of surprise and relief. As I crossed the threshold, I felt an odd sense of dissonance. This place that had once been home now felt like a stranger's house. We sat down in the living room, the same room where countless family gatherings had unfolded over the years. The furniture was older, worn at the edges, but otherwise unchanged. Dust motes floated lazily in the late afternoon light streaming through the curtains. No one spoke immediately, the silence stretched taut between us, heavy with unspoken words. Finally, my mother broke it. "I'm so glad you came," she said, her voice trembling slightly. She reached out as if to touch my hand but stopped herself halfway, her fingers hovering uncertainly before retreating back to her lap. "I didn't come here because of what you want," I replied evenly, meeting her gaze. "I came because I needed answers." She nodded slowly, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Behind her, my father entered the room, his movements cautious, almost hesitant. He looked smaller somehow, frielier than I remembered. For years, he'd been the towering figure of authority in our household, the one whose word was law. Now he seemed diminished, burdened by something more than just age. "What happened?" I asked, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "Why did you treat me the way you did? Was I really such a burden that you couldn't wait to get rid of me?" My question hung in the air like a challenge, sharp and unyielding. My father shifted uncomfortably in his seat while my mother clasped her hands tightly together, as though trying to hold herself together. "It wasn't about you," my father said finally, his voice gravelly with emotion. "It was never about you being a burden. It was fear. We were scared." "Scared of what?" I pressed, incredulous. "That I might actually need you for once?" "No," my mother interjected quickly, shaking her head. "We were scared of failing. Of losing everything. Your brother mentioned the idea of asking you to leave, and we panicked. We thought if we could cut costs, make ends meet without you staying here, we'd be okay. But it spiraled out of control, and by the time we realized how wrong we were, it was too late." Her words struck a chord deep within me, stirring emotions I thought I'd buried long ago. Anger simmered beneath the surface, bubbling up alongside flashes of sadness and confusion. They had acted out of fear, that much was clear, but it didn't erase the pain they'd caused. Still, hearing them admit their mistakes, seeing the regret etched into their faces, made it harder to cling to the bitterness I'd carried for so long. "And now?" I asked after a pause, my tone softer but still probing. "What do you expect from me? You think I'll just sign those papers and let you walk away scot-free?" "No," my father admitted, his shoulders sagging under the weight of his guilt. "We don't deserve that. All we can do is ask for your forgiveness and hope you'll consider helping us, not because we earned it, but because maybe there's still some part of you that cares." His honesty caught me off guard. There was no manipulation, no attempt to justify their actions beyond owning up to their failures. Just raw vulnerability laid bare before me. It was unsettling, forcing me to confront the complexity of forgiveness in ways I hadn't anticipated. 4 days afterward, I wrestled with my decision. Part of me wanted to refuse outright, to watch them face the consequences of their choices without my intervention. Another part, a quieter, more compassionate part, couldn't ignore the fact that they were human, flawed and desperate, just like everyone else. And then there was the house itself, a silent witness to both joy and heartache, standing as a testament to the life I'd once known. One evening, as I sat alone in my apartment staring at the stack of documents they'd sent me, I picked up the phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in years. On the other end, a familiar voice answered, warm and welcoming despite the distance that had grown between us. "Hey, Aunt Clara," I said, my voice tinged with uncertainty. "Do you have a minute to talk?" Clara, my mother's younger sister, had always been different from the rest of the family. Where others saw problems as obstacles to avoid, she approached them head-on, armed with wisdom and empathy. Over the years, she'd kept in touch sporadically, sending letters and care packages during my darkest days. Though I hadn't leaned on her as much as I should have, her presence had been a lifeline when I needed it most. "Of course, sweetheart," she replied, her tone instantly soothing. "What's on your mind?" I took a deep breath and began explaining everything. The call from my parents, their plea for help, the tangled web of emotions pulling me in opposite directions. As I spoke, the knot in my chest loosened ever so slightly, as though sharing my burden with someone who truly understood brought a measure of clarity. When I finished, Aunt Clara was quiet for a moment, digesting my words. Then she spoke, her voice calm but firm. "Forgiveness isn't easy, especially when trust has been broken. But holding on to anger won't heal you, it'll only weigh you down. Sometimes, letting go doesn't mean forgetting or excusing what happened. It means choosing peace over pain." Her advice resonated deeply, resonating with the internal tug-of-war I'd been fighting. Forgiveness wasn't about absolving them of responsibility, it was about freeing myself from the chains of resentment that had bound me for years. The next day, I met with my parents again. This time, I brought the signed documents with me, tucked neatly inside a folder. When I handed them over, their expressions shifted from shock to disbelief, followed by overwhelming gratitude. "Thank you," my mother whispered, tears streaming down her face. "You have no idea what this means to us." "I know exactly what it means," I replied, my voice steady but kind. "But understand this, Signing these papers doesn't mean I've forgotten what happened. It means I'm willing to give us a chance to rebuild, to see if there's still something worth saving." They nodded fervently, promising to work toward earning back my trust. Whether they succeeded remained to be seen, but for the first time in years, I allowed myself to hope. Hope that perhaps forgiveness could pave the way for healing, for all of us. The months that followed were anything but smooth, but they carried a quiet momentum, a fragile yet determined effort to mend what had been broken. My parents kept their promise, taking small but meaningful steps to rebuild the trust they had shattered. They invited me to family dinners, not with grand gestures or forced cheerfulness, but with genuine humility. At first, I hesitated, unsure if I could stomach sitting across from them without feeling the sting of old wounds. But something about their sincerity, the way my mother would nervously ask how my day was going, or how my father would offer to help with even the smallest tasks, began to chip away at the walls I'd built around myself. One evening, as we sat together in the living room after dinner, my father cleared his throat and looked directly at me. "We owe you more than just apologies," he said, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. "You've given us a chance, and we want to make sure you know how much that means to us." He reached into his pocket and pulled out an envelope, sliding it across the coffee table toward me. I stared at it, confused. "What's this?" "Open it," my mother urged gently, her eyes shining with anticipation. Inside the envelope was a check, for a significant amount of money. I frowned, looking up at them. "I don't understand. What's this for?" "It's your share of the house sale," my father explained. "We should have included you from the start, but instead, we treated you like you didn't matter. This is yours, no strings attached." I felt a lump rise in my throat, torn between disbelief and gratitude. For years, I'd convinced myself that they saw me as expendable, someone whose contributions, even financial ones, were easily overlooked. But here they were, acknowledging my place in the family in a way that words alone never could. I don't know what to say," I admitted, my voice cracking slightly. "You don't have to say anything," my mother replied softly. "Just know that we're trying. Really trying." And they were. Over time, their efforts became less about making amends and more about simply being present, in both big moments and small ones. When I landed a promotion at work, they celebrated with me, genuinely proud of my achievements. When I went through a rough patch after ending a relationship, they listened without judgment, offering comfort rather than unsolicited advice. Slowly but surely, the dynamics of our family began to shift, evolving into something healthier, more balanced. Aunt Clara played a pivotal role in this transformation. She became a bridge between us, encouraging open conversations and reminding everyone, including me, that healing takes time. During one particularly memorable visit, she gathered us all around the kitchen table for what she called a family reset. Armed with cookies and tea, she guided us through a heart-to-heart discussion about expectations, boundaries, and forgiveness. "We all mess up," she said firmly, glancing around the table. "But love isn't about perfection. It's about showing up, even when it's hard. Even when we're scared." Her words resonated deeply, reinforcing the progress we'd made while reminding us that there was still work to be done. By the end of the evening, laughter had replaced tension, and for the first time in years, I felt truly connected to the people sitting beside me. As seasons changed, so did our relationships. The house where I'd grown up was sold, marking the end of an era. But instead of mourning its loss, we embraced the opportunity to create new memories elsewhere. My parents downsized to a cozy cottage near the lake, inviting me over regularly for weekend visits. My siblings, who had initially been hesitant to engage, gradually warmed up, realizing that rebuilding wasn't just about repairing old bonds, it was also about forging new ones. One summer afternoon, as we gathered on the porch of their new home, watching the sun dip below the horizon, my mother turned to me with a smile. "Do you remember those summers we spent out here when you were little? You used to chase fireflies until it got too dark to see." I chuckled, nodding. "Yeah, and then I'd beg you to let me stay outside just a little longer." "Well," she said, her eyes twinkling mischievously, "there's no bedtime now. Why don't we go catch some fireflies tonight?" The idea seemed absurdly simple, almost childish. But as we grabbed mason jars and headed into the yard, I realized how profound it was. In that moment, surrounded by the people who had once hurt me but were now working tirelessly to heal, I felt a sense of belonging I hadn't experienced in years. Fireflies danced in the twilight, their soft glow mirroring the warmth spreading through my chest. That night, as we laughed and reminisced under a blanket of stars, I understood that forgiveness isn't a destination, it's a journey. One filled with setbacks and triumphs, doubts and discoveries. But along the way, it teaches us the beauty of second chances, not just for others, but for ourselves. In the end, my family didn't return to the way things were before, they couldn't. Too much had changed, too many scars remained. But what emerged was something far better, a foundation built on honesty, vulnerability, and mutual respect. A reminder that while people can disappoint us, they can also surprise us, with courage, with growth, and with love. And as I stood there, jar of fireflies in hand, listening to the sound of my family's laughter echoing through the night, I knew one thing for certain: despite everything, I was exactly where I belonged.